Now this is actually part 4 of the video we're making to do the handlebar risers, but I'm going to try to include some other information that I hope will be really useful for everybody. Now when you're working on a motorcycle, there's a lot of big flat surfaces, gas tanks, sides. You can use a buffing wheel very easily, but there's always parts that you really have to do by hand. And it doesn't matter what shape the motorcycle is, or what size, what kind of paint you're going to use, or how you're going to actually do this, whether it's a restoration of old paint or you've just put on new paint like we have in the last few days. There's a way to buff and polish it, and I'm going to try to share what I know over the 50+ years that I've been a painter. Now the first thing to keep in mind is I always try to gear my life around the idea that I ride motorcycles or fly airplanes all summer, and all winter I would spend building, painting, designing, whatever. And this part of the world, we have a long winter. I wanted to show some of the projects we've done recently. We buffed out this 35-year-old paint, I think with some pretty good results. In the last couple days we've put the clear on this. This is ready to be buffed out, and that's going to be the focal point of this video. But I just want to give a couple of, I guess, just common sense information that a lot of people don't understand about paint. Now, I have really been painting for over 50 years. Not everybody I know has been painting over 50 years. Believe it or not, I did own a 1947 Air Coupe, and I even painted that. But in my day, I have painted many guitars, boat engines, and God knows what else. And here's the point. Back in the 60s and 70s, basically things got painted with lacquer or acrylic lacquer. But the modern paint we have now, the rules of buffing and polishing still apply. Now I have an attic room in my house where I have many of the models that I designed and built over about a 40-year career in model aviation. But the biggest thing that I keep them for is I love to look at the paint. Now the paint on these, you could never use a buffing wheel on this. This is a delicate surface, it's balsa wood. Some of them are tissue, and there's just no realistic way. They're very detailed. I don't know if you can see the detail. People that ride motorcycles, you don't know the blessing you have is you can put all the paint you want on a motorcycle. On a model plane, this paint has to be ultra thin, and if you want to win awards with them, it better be very, very thin. So the point of this is, one of the things I became relatively competent at anyway was buffing by hand. Since we never were able to use machines, this is butyrate dope. It's a derivative of lacquer. Both very delicate would be the biggest way to put it. Very detailed. You can see how thin the paint lines are on this, and this one even had little Ferrari stickers. But anyway, the point is I want to share the information I know about buffing by hand in this video. We've done plenty of videos about buffing away with a big giant machine. I want to do this one by hand. Now, it's hard to believe, if somebody's not a model airplane person, how many thousands of hours go into just the designing, the building. As an example, the Spitfire here, the wing is tissue covered. All of the work that goes into these models. But now when you take this technology and you apply it to a motorcycle, doing a motorcycle is like a piece of cake. It's like asking somebody that's a world-class chef, can you boil me an egg? And I want to share some of that today. That's the motive I have. Now in my little, I call it a museum, but it's not. We actually call it the Spitfire bedroom. I come up here every once in a while and I just look at all of the work. This really is the story of my life, all of the work that I put into this. But now, it has nothing to do with motorcycling, but there are about, I think Paul Taylor's put about 1,000 of the videos that detail how to build these models, how to fly them, the championships that we've gone to, the meetups, whatever, contests. And just as one quick example everybody can relate to, this is one of the last models I had built, And I had some Yamaha paint left over, so it was very cool at the time. I used up some of that paint, mixed it with some of the lacquers, the Brodak dopes, and we came up with, well, you can figure it any way you want. There's a lot of work to do in this. Anyway, but the idea is, and I love YouTube. I'm a big YouTube fan because people share. And even if you don't want to know what they have to share, you just go to another video. But I've learned so much, and I feel compelled to share what I've learned with other people. Now I'm trying to, and I used to do this with the model airplane videos, of which there are, I think, about 1,000 out on YouTube. But this is not about airplanes. This is all paint. No matter what paint you use, if you looked at it under a microscope, it looks like that. So it does have some shine. It absolutely does have some shine. But if the light is reflecting off of this picture, a mountaintop, and if you understand how this works, boy, the rest of it is easy. And by the way, it doesn't matter if it's a polished aluminum or if it's polished paint or jewelry or gold. The same rule applies. Now, what every jeweler in the world, what every painter in the world would like to have is paint that dries flat. The only trouble is it doesn't dry flat, because what happens is, in my case, I paint outside, there'll be a little speck of dust, there'll be a little fisheye in the paint, there'll be some contamination, a bug flies into it, so that my final paint, and this part we just painted is a perfect example of this. What we're striving to do is with 2500, 3000 grit sandpaper is turn either one of these surfaces into this surface. Now, think about this, because this is exactly the reality of what we're doing. A diamond. Your wife or girlfriend probably has a diamond ring. Well, look at the diamond close. It's cut into facets. Every one of the facets is a flat. So a flat means the light comes down, hits it, bounces off, and it shines. Wow. Well, if you took a diamond in the rough and it's all rough and pebbly, it doesn't shine. It only shines when you make it flat. The reason for that is it's a simple law of physics. Light reflects. So this light coming down hits a mirror. Let's call it a mirror. So what happens is a surface, to make it exaggerated, the more rough it is. And you know, an inexpensive car, like Karen has a Volkswagen Jetta. I had fun one day. She had scratched the car, had a little fender bender. And I tapped it out and everything. I said, you know, just for fun, let me see what I could do here. And I took some 2500 paper, sanded it flat, and buffed it out. Now the problem is the rest of the car looked pretty crappy. Well, and I know Glenn has done the same thing. He had a car that he had buffed the whole car out. Well, now, this is the part that's difficult to understand, but I'm going to try to share it, what I've learned over many, many years. What happens is most people want to take a part that looks like this, and I know this is a crude way of doing it, but it's good, solid information, and they want to buff it. Well, buffing it just means it's a little shinier, but it doesn't have that diamond jewel look where it pops the light right back at you. So if you just buff an unsanded surface, it looks better, but it doesn't look as good as you possibly could make it. The way you make it, the best it can possibly be, is to patiently sand it. In this case today, we're going to sand and buff by hand. You don't even need a machine. All those model planes that I showed were all buffed 100%. I didn't even own a buffer back then because it's too dangerous. You could go through the paint. Those airplanes have a paper thin amount of paint on them. So if you understand what we're striving for, flat, absolutely flat surface. On big flat surfaces, you can do that with a sanding block, but on a part like we're going to be doing, it's very detailed, and you've got to get in corners, and you have to make little tools up. Still, it's very easy to do when you know how to do it, and when somebody shares this. See, the problem is, years ago, especially in the world of model planes, nobody shared anything. Everything was a big trade secret, because they all wanted to win these championships and awards and whatever. But nowadays, that's not the case, thanks to YouTube and thanks to all the people that have shared the information. Now, whether it's aluminum, whether it's paint, no matter what it is. Remember that word, flat. Remember diamond. Diamond, flat. When you get it flat, it doesn't have to be shiny. It's got to be flat. Then to make a flat surface shiny, you can do that in a matter of minutes. But if it's like this, it takes forever to get something to shine. So if this is the basic 101 of buffing paint, whether it's old paint, which we just demonstrated, we did, and I want to take this piece out here. This is 35-year-old paint, and we did the demo on that on the Evil Twin project. It doesn't matter, or if it's brand new paint like we're going to do today. It's 2 days old. Flat, you start with something flat, and from that point on, you're on the winning team. So here's the part we made, and this is actually video 4 of making this part. Now the process, once this clear is all sprayed, the most obvious things, if you have a big run or something, like we have a run right here, not a run, it picked up something from the air, a little wrinkle in the paint, anything like that, doesn't matter, we're going to sand it all out. Now most people, when you're showing them or instructing them how to paint, they get panicky when they see a little run or a little divot or something. Not to worry. This is all going to get sanded out. It's all going to get sanded out by hand. It's going to get buffed by hand. This is a good example of a typical part that you can do without a buffing wheel. Now you might try to use a buffing wheel here and you catch an edge and whatever, but it's an easy enough part to do by hand. But the first thing to do, get some 2500 grit sandpaper out and sand it flat. So the first thing that I do, and this would depend on how old the paint is. If this paint were months and months old, I could probably get away with 2000 grit paper, but 2500, and I just don't have any 3000 here, but even if you're doing softer paint, the less grit the better. Now the reason is I don't want to have a lot of sanding scratches on this. So if I look at this, and I can pick one little part, just as an example. I want to pick this here, and I want to try to show that they're right there. I'm not sure you can see it, there's some little spots in the paint, whatever they are. Well, we'll do just as an example, I'll sand this piece out. Now I'll try to do this in a way that, because when you're working by hand, I want to have good lighting. I want to have, the best of all worlds is to have fluorescent lighting. If you have fluorescent lighting, you wind up seeing things in the paint that you never see out in the sun. If you look anybody that's a jeweler or anything, a jeweler wants to have light because he wants the light to reflect off. He wants it to look better than it really is, like a jewelry counter. But in my case, I want it the opposite. I want to see every flaw. See, if I wanted this to look better, I could hang up like a light track and put 100-watt bulbs in it, yeah, and then the light's bouncing off everything. But fluorescent light doesn't let you get away with that. So from the years of model planes, I always remember any of the people that really did high quality finishing always worked on the fluorescent lights. That was always step one. Now this is going to sand down 2500 grit. You would think wooden sand. You'd think you'd be like forever. Well, not really the case. In fact, I want to show this. We did that without camera cuts. That's pretty much sanded flat. And you can see the difference between a flat, smooth, flat surface and something here that has little specks in it. And this is, a lot of people that have a motorcycle never bother to do this final step. And of course, if you're happy with that finish right there, nobody's going to hate you. But I want to go to where it's like that. So basically, step one is to get the whole part looking like that. Now another little trick, and I know this is really highly detailed stuff that I'm talking about. What I do when I'm going to do this kind of finishing, if I have any incandescent bulbs, replace them with these, I call them fake fluorescents, because they give off a different kind of light that allows you to see. Fluorescent lighting shows mistakes. Incandescent lighting just blinds you with the light. So if you're going to do any high quality sanding or detailing, I would always say try using as many fluorescent lights and as few incandescent as possible. Well, here's one little thing that may be of value. And again, it's a painting stick. I take my 2500 sandpaper, and I have a little tool. Now what the little tool is going to allow me to do is, if you look real close here, if I try to sand there, I'm never going to get up in the corners. And I would use the same kind of a tool, wrap a buffing rag of microfiber around it, and knowing how to make these little tools to get in all the corners and angles and edges, or if I have a little run, a little divot, a little anything, this is going to allow me to clean it up. Again, having the right tools. See, a lot of people don't even know how to make these tools, and what I found is a lot of people know how to paint real well. They're real good with a gun, and they're not that good with buffing, so they just say, ah, to hell with it, just leave it just the way it is. When they're only inches away from the goal line to where that paint is going to look spectacular. And to be honest, all the work and energy I put into this kind of stuff, I want it to really be good. And some of my friends, you know, they ridicule me saying, oh yeah, real men paint their bike flat black and take a hammer and dent the tank and then it shows you're a real man. Yeah. Too bad I don't buy into that. Anyway, so now I'm going to go through the whole part, but basically that using little tools to get all the flats just the way I want them. This part I can do by hand. It's got a little curve. This part here needs to be done with a sanding block. But we want the whole part to be dead flat. I just thought this would be a good time to mention a couple of things. Why don't we just dry sand this? Why do you wet sand? Well, the wet sanding, the paper that's made for wet and dry sandpaper is made with a different kind of glue than dry sandpaper. You'll notice if you try to use dry sandpaper in water, a lot of times the grit will just fall off and you'll make a mess. Well, the wet and dry paper, the stuff that we've used in the last couple of years, real high quality stuff, several brands, the Rhino Hide, Indasa, different brands. But the worst of them is they're still good, 3M of course. But the idea of the wet sanding, see that water, the little grit that's coming off of here, if we were dry sanding, it would just clog up the paper. Notice there's nothing on the paper. Well, it means the sandpaper lasts a whole lot longer. Now, I have heard, and John Pothia, my friend out in California, is on his Corvette, he's been using some real dry, 3000 grit dry, I think, and he said it's absolutely unbelievable how good it is. But I don't have any to test, and when I do, I'll let you know. In the meantime, it's the devil we know. Now, you notice I'm trying to do as much of this as I can with a block and not my finger, because my finger is going to make a radius, the stick is going to make a flat. So any place I can get the stick, I'm going to try to use the stick. Then on all the radiuses, I got to get the phone. It must be the time to pick up the baby here. Now, part of this, you can't make it up. What that phone call was about, that was Luciano saying, you know, this project we started, I wanted to use the Kawasaki RISERs that are no longer available. He found, you need two, of course, there's a left and a right. He found one on the internet this morning. Well, I'll be riding around with one is of no value. But I appreciate that he's been trying to find them for me, but I've already passed the point. I think the system I've got here is going to work a lot better. So, in a hope of sharing information, 2500 grit paper is good. 3000, maybe a little bit better. But here's the bottom line. You never want to take 3000 grit and then use rougher paper on top of it. It's okay to start, in this case, even if you started with 2000 and then some 2500, and then some 3000, but you go in the direction where the paper is finer and finer. You never want to go and right now put some rougher paper than 2500. Reason is you're going to put scratches in there, and then you got double the amount of paint. You've got to get to the bottom of the scratch and remove material to get it back to flat. So this takes almost no paint off, 2500 or 3000. Now here's another little, I guess tip is the right word. You want to sand until the part is flat. You want the part to be flat, but there's no advantage to keep sanding once the part is perfectly flat. This is flat, this is flat, this has got to be sanded yet. Once it's flat, you stop. And the idea of the 2500 grit is it takes less material to get it flat. If we were using 1000 grit, by the time we got it flat, we would have taken a lot more material off. So this takes the minimum amount of material off, which is in our favor. And because this paint's only a few days old, it's soft. So the paint tends to come right off. Harder paint, a 35-year-old paint on that Evil Twin project, takes a lot longer to buff out. The whole part is flat sanded out now. Now we're ready to see which one of the compounds we have available is going to bring this shine up quickly. Now the first thing I always try, and this is 4C, available at Body Shop Supply, 8021. This is a medium cut. This is not a rough cut and not a super ultra high gloss cut. But what this does, and this gives me an idea, let me get a little bit out of it. I'm running out of it too, by the way. If I run out, I have substitutes, but this is usually the best. So what I want to do is just take one little spot on here. Again, it's different compounds. If you notice when you look at compounds and polishes, some are made for machine application, some are made for hand application. Some say don't use on a machine, and some are better off by hand. Well, this one I've found over the years by doing it by hand, a lot of little pieces. And there's always parts of bigger pieces that you really can't get a buffing wheel in. Little crack. I don't know, maybe you could, but it's just not that. It's not worth the effort. It's not worth risking the part because those buffing wheels tend to go through on the corners. And 8021 is usually a good material. In fact, I'm going to have to get another jar of it. It's about $45 for that jar too. Last time I bought it, which probably means now it's $150. But anyway, I wanted to just roughly show this. This will rough out the shine on the part. And I wanted to do it without camera cuts so you can see how much time it takes to do it. Now granted, if you had a big fairing or a big gas tank, you'd want to use a machine. But on this part, it's just easier to do it this way. Now, it's not totally buffed out yet, but the parts that we haven't done, I want to make sure I get that, and the parts we have done. So now the trick is to get every little, and using this, and I ought to give a little demo of this. I don't know why I always skip over. See, the criticism people have had of my videos is you skip over steps. Well, once in a while, yeah, I do. But I just forget that, like a lot of people wouldn't have the idea to use a stick in here. Again, I try to pass the information on because when I was building models and I was a lot younger, I'd ask people, how do you buff out a model plane? And boy, you couldn't get any information. It was impossible. The few people that knew how to do it were guarding it with their life. But now, thanks to YouTube mostly, and a lot of other factors, the paints are very easy to buff out. And there's no reason, unless you love flat black, and let's face it, who doesn't love flat? Who doesn't want to take a can of barbecue paint and paint their whole bike barbecue paint? But if you look at this, and I'm doing it without camera cuts, you see what's going to happen? It's not going to be long. I'll have the whole part sparkling. It'll really be, I think it's going to be, this will be the little crown jewel of our project. And we have the whole project now. This is chapter 4, but 1, 2, 3, and then there'll only be one more, I think, of when we get the whole kit put together, installing it on a motorcycle once it comes above 5 degrees out there. Now, one small advantage of doing a part by hand as opposed to by a machine, a part with a lot of edges, I call them porcupine parts, or a lot of corners and edges. Using a machine, you tend to, once that machine catches an edge, it can make a mess. Or you can go right through the paint. Well, when you do it by hand, it's a lot less chance that you're going to do that. Now, what happened in the course of doing this, I wanted to try a couple of different polishes. And just to share this information, I'm not getting paid by any of these people. The 4C 8021, that is professional grade stuff. That really works great. But there are plenty of Maguires and plenty of, I mean, what I think is a mistake, to boil it down, is to think that it's in the polish that the shine comes from. The shine comes from knowing how to use it effectively. And I have even seen people, and I hate to admit this, I've seen people that used to buff out their model planes with toothpaste. And it used to blow me away, but that getting that nice shine on there, it's more a question of technique and perseverance than just buying some expensive polish. Now, to offer an alternative polish that you can buy for about a third the price of what the professional grade stuff is, this, especially if you use by machine, it says right here, you use by hand or with, this is a buffer. Well, you know what? I've tried this. I actually used it on Karen's car. I want to see if this is going to work. I got a couple of spots on here that I haven't buffed out yet, but you can always do, and always the best thing is to do a little test. Take a piece of a clean rag. This is old microfibers, by the way. Put a little material on. I'm big on doing my own tests. I don't believe anything. Certainly you don't believe anything they put on the news anymore. So at least if you have some way of doing your own test, you're way ahead of the game. And what this allows me to do is get right down in that corner. And this is the kind of thing years ago when I was doing an airplane, I always remember this, I don't know why. I'd be watching a football game and I'd say, that part or that wing or that tail used to take me 3 football games or 1 football game or halftime or whatever. But I have to again say that I was most impressed. Of all the polishes I've ever had, that 4C is really worth the money. But when you run out, you run out. Now let's see how this looks up here. This is, again, there's a lot of perseverance. And if you want nice big strong arms, nice big muscles come summertime, when you're riding your sport bike around with clip-ons and you want to pull that jacket off and show those biceps out. Oh yeah. Now the final step is to get a coat of, and this is just for protection while I'm assembling this part out in the tundra there, but a nice coat of Maguire's cleaner wax always is a good way to finish up a product with a brand new microfiber that doesn't have any grit on it. And as I look at how the last 4 videos have included making this part, painting it, getting ready for the assembly, that's our next, we are ready to assemble. Every part of this has been an enjoyable thing. I hope you have enjoyed sharing the videos with us. And again, thanks for watching. And just because this video is about buff and paint, I wanted to say that on our previous, I don't know how, a week or 2 ago maybe, we did a very extensive video on buffing out. This is 35-year-old paint. That might be worth checking out too. But as always, thanks for watching.
Thank you.